to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf, and today our special guest is a returning guest, Jay Amberg, and he's back with his book, The Healer's Daughters. Jay, so nice to have you back.
It's great to be here.
Let's talk about your book, The Healer's Daughters. Last time we spoke, you were on your way back to Turkey, and I think this is what came out of your long trip.
Yeah, I went back to Turkey. I had originally written a novel called Bone Box that you and I talked about.
Yes.
But I went back to Turkey to teach teachers to teach English. And I really didn't intend to write another novel. But there's something about the place. I lived in a city, Izmir, which is right on the Aegean Sea. In fact, the apartment I lived in looked out over the Aegean Sea, and the area and the people both I just fell in love with.
I'm sure every step of the pavement is historic, right?
It
is.
is.
A place like that between Asia and Europe, right? The crossroad between two continents.
And it was 2,500 years ago, and it is now. My apartment didn't quite look out on Greek islands, though I told people that it did. But the city of Izmir is closer to Athens than it is to Istanbul. It's south and west of Istanbul. So it's a very European city, very much a cafe culture.
So coffee drinking rather than
coffee
tea
drinking, yeah. Closest city that I visited in terms of the feel of it is Barcelona. Less political than Barcelona, but it looks out on the sea. It's the gateway from Turkey into Europe, and I spent 3 years teaching there, teaching teachers, as I said, to teach English, and the place just got to me again. And the story came out of the place. The city that much of the story is set in is Bergamo, which is just a market town of 100,000 people or so. But once upon a time, 2,500 years ago, it was Pergamon, which was a city that was Athens' cultural and artistic rival. It was never a political rivalry, but it was a cultural rivalry, and all that history, all that culture is still literally there.
Well, with a fascinating setting like that, and your experience learning and picking up some of that language that you're exposed to, I think the book was calling to you.
I think the story came to me. I didn't come to the story.
Yeah, I
agree completely.
Can you pronounce your three main characters' name for us?
Because one of the things
I'm afraid to say them.
I did in this book for the first time, it's the sixth of the thrillers that I've written. Yes. And in the first five, there's an American male of a certain age that finally figures things out. And what I did with this book was just get rid of him. There's no American male of a certain age that figures things out at all. Yeah. The three main characters.
This is your 12th book, right?
It's my 12th book, my sixth thriller.
Yes.
And I've done 6 other books in addition to that. But the three main characters are all women. They're all Turkish, all very bright, very energetic, and what they're basically doing, which doesn't always go well for them, is speaking truth to power.
Oh my.
But each does in a different way. Özlem Barulu is an archaeologist who was the head of a couple of excavations, real excavations. I made her the head of them. But she too often spoke truth and didn't get along with some of the political entities. And so she's forcibly retired before the book starts. Her daughter is Elif, who is an artist. She's a sculptor, and she has a penchant for the ancient goddesses that predated the world religions, predated Christianity, predated Islam, and she's taken by these beings, and that's really the basis for her life.
Well, that's fascinating. And
No,
when
yeah,
you talk about rivaling Athens, they have
right.
a number of the gods too.
Yeah,
Is
and
this the kind you're talking about?
yes,
Yeah.
Athena was the goddess who was very big in both those cities, but in addition to that, there's a number of others. Sekhmet, for example, was an Egyptian goddess that there is a temple to in Bergama, which was Pergamon back in the day,
Right.
because she was that important that even an Egyptian goddess
Yes,
had a temple.
Yeah, must be revered.
Yeah.
Yeah, respected.
So,
yeah.
And the third of the main characters is a Ministry of Culture investigator from Ankara, Turkey. Her name is Tuğçe İskan, and she really has a problem with speaking truth to power. She doesn't get along very well with the people in her ministry team because she's extremely bright.
She's too direct.
She's too direct, and her social skills are not her forte, getting things done.
Oh, I can see. Yeah, I can see.
And so she doesn't play the game.
Yeah, the conflict brewing.
And she's has almost a photographic memory, so she works faster and does a better job than anyone else. And this does not endear her to her pretty much all male colleagues in the ministry office in which she works.
Or her bosses.
No, really, yeah, almost no one. She's too smart and she's too forthright to really make friends and influence people.
Well, I hope she has some friends.
Not many, although she does sort of develop a friend through the story. And the story begins with a terrorist bombing in Bergama.
Which could be happening right now as we
unfortunately, right? Could still be happening because it's a UNESCO site, and ISIS did make a point of trying to destroy the UNESCO sites that when they conquered a particular area. And they hadn't conquered this area, but it's very plausible that they would try to destroy some of the cultural background, because that was a big part of what ISIS was doing.
The goal. And this immediacy that could be happening right now is in the setting too, right? Can you tell us a little bit of how you pick your scenes? Are they actual places?
They're all actual places. Some of the people in the background are actual people in the background. The characters are all fictional, but everything that's happening happens in places I visited. Because I was in Turkey for 3 years, I met people and became friends with people who would take me to small villages and show me what village life was like. And there's a very important scene pretty far along in the story in which Elif and her mother, Uzlum, come across a elderly woman who's been living alone in a fairly rural place, not rural in like the American Midwest, but not heavily populated. And both the house she lives in, and she's not the character, but the character is very similar to what the woman was like, because there was deep sadness in her life. Her husband had died, her son had been killed in a car accident, and she had been living alone in this very lonely area for quite a few years. But she knew something that was very important to the story. She didn't understand she knew it, but her testament mattered to how the story played out.
That's very...
And so all of those kinds of scenes were very much based on my being able to visit particular places and build these fictional scenes in these not just real places, but places that I had spent time in.
So this technique of being a writer, do you actually take notes while you're at that location, or do you take pictures
I
and
take
try
pictures
to
and I
recall?
take notes. I do some recording, but not a lot of recording because I'm not trying to get what people tell me verbatim.
Right.
I'm trying to get a scene, an event that would come out of that setting, not out of that person who I was talking to.
Yes. And the feel of the location is half of the storytelling.
For me, someone mentioned this to me very recently, that the setting throughout all 6 of the novels is a character. And I think in this particular story, the setting in this Aegean area of Turkey is very much a main character. The story couldn't really happen elsewhere, given the specific details. And that allows me, enables me, I think, to get deeper into the meaning of the story.
And I think that's probably what we as educators all would love to do, is to have people read and learn something about Turkey, even if they didn't come to this book because of that.
Well, hopefully, and maybe come to understand a little bit about what was happening with ISIS, which and one of the things that was happening was that they were basically stealing ancient artifacts from whatever cultures where they invaded, and then selling them to very rich Westerners. And ISIS, of course, detested the West, and the Westerners detested ISIS, but these large economic transactions were still occurring. That there was, on both sides, a lack of any actual belief. It was about money and that sort of thing.
And the destruction of the culture is one way of taking the identity away.
And
right?
that was very much what ISIS was trying to do. The Kurdish culture, there were a couple of religious groups, the Zahidis, that the ISIS tried to basically commit genocide. It didn't quite work, but they killed a lot of people, and I wanted that to be the backdrop to the story, is that the evil isn't just political, the evil goes much deeper than that.
Yes, yes, wow. Well, it's a very exciting read, and I'm very glad to have you here. What about the social media part of promoting a book? It's so important now. How have you been part of that? Have you been receiving responses from readers?
Yes, but that's a little bit of a lie. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, I'm everywhere, but I'm not really part of that. I work with a very competent person, Sarah Kaz, who does all of that. She's
the wizard.
She's social media J. She's of an age where she gets that much better than I do, and she's able to promote the book much better than I could.
Well, you are very fortunate to have someone to handle that front for you, but you still hear the readers' responses, right?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, what do you feel about, how do you enjoy, or what do you enjoy most about hearing your readers' reaction to a book rather quickly?
I think that I enjoy most when a person says something that I didn't quite myself understand. When a person says to me that a particular character touched her, and I think, yes, hot damn. That I'm glad that that character came alive for that reader. And there's a lot of that, that I come to understand stories, my own stories, better. One of the things that I like to do best is work with book groups, book clubs, have a session in which after reading the book, they get to quiz me, interrogate me, and I always learn something from that. I would hope that they've learned something too, but I always do.
That sounds like a wonderful opportunity to be a face-to-face
It's
situation, right?
face-to-face, but it's more than that, because it's their understanding of the story helps me along, not only with whatever story it was, but with what the next story might be. As I mentioned early in our conversation, for the first time I basically killed off the American male that figures things out, and I think this story benefits a lot from that. Turkey is very much still a patriarchal nation, and having these women who are either bright or frighteningly bright be standing up to the entrenched system was fun to write, and that a lot of readers are noticing that, not the fun to write part, but that these characters are really taking control not only of their own lives, but trying to change what's happening within certain elements of society. I like that. I mean, that was what I hoped would happen for readers.
Is there an audio version of your
There
book
isn't an
coming
audio
up?
version. I think in some ways that would help, but as we mentioned with the names, both of the places and the people, it would take a very good reader to pull off an audio book of this particular novel.
Well, that would be very exciting to look into. Well, and what about, what other ways are you responding or meeting your readers?
What I'm doing just this week, I'm doing this with you. Sunday night, I have a radio interview with Rick Cogan.
Oh, yes.
And then next Tuesday, the 14th, I have a presentation interview at the Glencoe Library.
Oh, that's
So I'm trying to get out into the real world as much as possible and just talk with people about the story.
and you will help them with the pronunciation.
Absolutely. I mean, it took me a while, and
tell us about that. Tell us about that story where the principal you met.
Well, I had been to Turkey to research a previous novel, and a friend who I had taught with came across an advert for a job in Izmir teaching teachers to teach English. And he was interested in doing it but couldn't commit full time. So he contacted me, and I couldn't commit full time. But we shared the job the first year.
Wow.
And the first day we were at one of the 3 schools we worked with, the principal said to us, smiling in a friendly sort of way, "Americans just can't pronounce our names." And her first name was Nesligal, and it took me a long time to get that right. It's not spelled like what it sounds like, and we just...
it's not just the accent, right?
It's not just the accent. It's some of the Muslim, for example, Barulu, who is the archaeologist, there's an umlaut over the O.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the umlaut over an O in German, but there's marks under letters.
Yeah.
Some letters are silent.
I see.
In fact, Barulu has a G in it, but you don't pronounce that. So,
and there's and I'm sure from that principal's name, there's consonant combinations that we don't even have.
Yes, that are not the same as ours, and it was something of an adventure throughout.
Well, as an English teacher, that must have been fascinating and expanded
Yeah.
your brain, right?
Oh,
Of the
very
way
much.
you
And that
see language.
was again the fun for me. Uh, sounds a little bit selfish, but it was. I think I helped the schools.
Mhm.
I think their teaching of English was better at the end of the 3 years than it was at the beginning. But I know that the people helped me understand the culture. I came to appreciate
Yes.
their lives much more deeply. Um, I, when I do anything like that, feel that I've learned as much or more than what the people that I've been hired to work with have learned. And that's the energizing part of it for me.
That's beautiful. Now, in your horizon, is there possibility for the book to be in Turkish?
You know,
Or
I don't know.
have you
It
been?
wouldn't necessarily be a tremendously popular
I
book
see.
in Turkey, except in the Aegean area, which is more westernized. Again, because it's about women, two of whom are young, sort
Might
of
not be
taking power,
yeah, maybe a
taking
touchy
control.
topic over there.
Exactly. It could be quite a touchy topic in other parts of Turkey where women are still very much just household creatures. And these women are very much not household creatures. They're out in the world.
And is there a possibility of you being interviewed by Turkish Americans here? It might be a
I don't know. I would, of course, be
opportunity.
interested in doing that for the reasons I already described, is
Yeah.
that I always learn something from that.
I remember your colleague, Amberg, who was a German teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and he had been interviewed by Hungary.
Right, yeah.
On
He
his
had
book
grown
about
up
his
in the
childhood. Yeah.
German-speaking area of Hungary.
And he wrote about the Hungarian Revolution, where his family came to America, and then his book was actually being interviewed by the Hungarian television.
And
so.
that I would be surprised if any official Turkish television ever wanted to interview me because of the content, because I'm American, and that's an interesting relationship right now. America and the United States and Turkey have had a very good relationship, but currently it's kind of complicated.
Yes,
So,
I think it's rather recent that has been.
Yeah,
it's turned sour. I can think before we had a very long, long
the
relationship.
Izmir, the city in which I lived, had been a NATO center for a long time, but that had stopped. And there's still a very strong, I shouldn't say very strong, there's still a strong, but it's no longer very strong, business connection between the United States and that area of Turkey, because Izmir is the gateway to the West and the gateway to Europe.
Jay, so what do you do as a writer to keep reading? Are you part of a book club?
I am part of a book club. For more than 40 years, I've been a member of something called the Bookworms, which is now an aging group of males who are local. The beauty of it, well, one of the beauties of it, that it still exists, is beautiful.
Yes.
But that the reading is mostly books I wouldn't pick up on my own.
Yes.
And so it enables me to read books that I wouldn't be pursuing on my own. The last person you interviewed, we read his book the last year, and that's something that I was very interested in, the space program.
Yes, and that's Robert Kurson's Rocket Man.
Rocket Man.
And that is something, again, we wouldn't have picked up ourselves. We didn't participate in some group. who
Right.
someone else
Yeah.
recommends. Yeah.
And once a year I recommend a book, but every other month of the year I'm reading something that someone else thought would be interesting.
Yes.
And that really helps. And there are writers I read regularly, but they're not necessarily mystery thriller writers.
Yes. Yes.
I'm currently reading Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell,
Oh, yes.
which is a strange book, as each of his books is, but one that I always come away having learned something from.
Thank you, Jay, for coming to our program.
It was wonderful to be here again, Yvonne. Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.